Daniel LaPlante was born on May 16, 1970, in Townsend, Massachusetts. There's not much information about his childhood, but he lived with his mother and stepfather, Elaine and David Moore, as well as two brothers, Stephen and Matthew. It is quite likely that Daniel had a miserable and traumatic childhood, during which he was physically and psychologically abused by his father and stepfather, but this information was provided by himself to the police. What is actually known is that at school, he was doing very poorly because of his dyslexia, and of course, for not receiving any kind of support. Also, his social life was almost non-existent. Other kids found him creepy and weird, and he always came to school smelling bad and wearing dirty clothes. As a result, his colleagues did their best to avoid him. During his teenage years, Daniel began a year of therapy with a psychiatrist on the recommendation of school officials and was diagnosed with hyperactivity disorder. However, the psychiatrist himself began to abuse him. The abuses lasted more than a year. It was not surprising that the boy, at the end of the sessions, left with an even worse mental condition than when he started. It was around this time that his criminal career began. Daniel spent most of his time with other teenagers, as lost as he was. At first they only went out to play football. Then they started pranking on the phone, and finally they broke into houses to steal. Daniel's motivation was only to steal valuables to get money. But what he enjoyed most was the thrill of being in someone else's house without them knowing. The boy took the longest for the place, moved objects and furniture, just to scare. He also liked to prepare drinks and leave them on the table, all for pleasure, and sometimes he didn't even steal anything. In 1986, a man named Bright Andrews lived in nearby Pepperell with his two daughters, 15-year-old Annie and 8-year-old Jessica. The family was going through a very difficult period following the loss of Brian's wife and the girl's beloved mother to cancer. As a single father, Brian had to work double time to support the family, which meant he didn't spend much time at home with the girls. Despite the age difference, Annie and Jessica got along well, and the death of their mother brought them even closer. Annie, as a teenager, was already starting to see boys with different eyes. She and her friends talked about dating, who had a crush on whom, in short, typical teenage conversations. So, when Annie started getting phone calls from a boy, she was curious. The mystery boy told her his name was Annie, and that he got her phone number from a mutual friend who was in high school. Of course, all of this was a lie. In fact, Daniel had broken into the Andrews family home, who once again scared the residents, from what is known. When he entered Annie's house, he didn't know she lived there, but he had already seen the girl at school and had probably seen her in family photos, becoming obsessed with her. On the phone, he described himself as tall, blonde, athletic, and smart. Annie was a little skeptical, but the mystery fueled the interest. The two continued talking on the phone for the next few weeks, and deep down, Annie liked talking to Danny, until one day, he asked her out and she agreed. Danny would pick her up at her house, and from there they would go to a local fair. When the appointed day arrived, Annie was excited. The doorbell rang and she ran to answer, but she was surprised when the boy at the door didn't look anything like what she'd expected. On the phone, he said he was tall, blonde, and athletic, but he wasn't. Daniel was very thin, about 1.52 tall, had dark hair, yellow teeth, sunken black eyes, thick eyebrows, and his skin was full of blackheads and pimples. Smiling, he introduced himself as Danny. Annie, trying to hide her dismay, still went to the meeting. She felt more vibrations from the moment she laid eyes on him. As they walked through the fair, Annie told Annie about her family, mentioning her mother's recent death. This was like flipping a power switch in his brain. His eyes lit up, and he was suddenly extremely excited. Daniel began bombarding Annie with questions about the death, and understandably the interrogation about her late mother made her extremely uncomfortable. He wanted to know how much her mother suffered. After they walked around for about an hour, Annie decided she already spent too much time with this weird, scary guy. She said she needed to get home, turned and left, making it very clear that she didn't want to see or speak to him again. Several days later, Annie and her sister were leaving the house when they started talking about their mother. They remembered a story she told and the good times they had together. So the two had an idea. They would do a spiritist session. Deep down, it was all a joke. They didn't expect anything to happen. But as they had nothing to do, they decided to try. The sisters went down the basement and did what they thought they knew to summon a spirit, by lighting candles, holding hands, and singing some songs their mother always sang. They weren't talking too seriously, but they needed a distraction. Suddenly, Brian came from work. The two of them hurried to tidy up and went upstairs to talk to their father. Annie and Jessica lay talking until late at night, when they began to hear the sound of knocking on the walls. The beats had a certain rhythm. It wasn't random. They began to think that perhaps the sounds had really evoked their mother's spirit. The two girls sat on the bedroom floor and listened to the knocking. They were stunned and happy, believing it was a manifestation of their mother. Their excitement was short-lived. The knocks became constant and only happened when they were home alone or late at night when their father was sleeping. It was becoming disturbing to the point that the girls lost sleep and spent the night scared. It didn't take long for objects and furniture to start moving around the house or disappearing. For example, one of the girls would put food on the kitchen counter, leave the room for 5 minutes, and when she came back it was gone. They told their father what was happening and that they believed there was a ghost in the house, but he didn't pay much attention to them. The sisters said it was their mother, but Brian reassured them. He said it was nothing. One night the sisters were alone in the house and the knocking started again. But this time, it looked like it was coming from under them. Annie grabbed the kitchen knife, and the two went down to the basement. On the basement wall was written a message, with what looked like blood, that said, "I'm in a room, come find me." Completely terrified, Annie and Jessica ran upstairs out of the house, and went to ask a neighbor for help, who let them stay there until their father got home from work. Brian was sure his daughters were playing with him, and was convinced that all the strange occurrences, including the writing on the wall, which he discovered to be ketchup, were the work of Annie and Jessica. Maybe they were just trying to get his attention because they feel so alone. He then decided to take his daughters to a therapist. 2 weeks after a basement incident, the banging on the wall stopped. However, the relief would not last long. One night, the girls were alone in the house when the knocking started again. This time, it was coming from Annie's room. She then took out a kitchen knife and together the two sisters went upstairs. When they reached Annie's bedroom door, they saw another message written on the wall which read, "I am back. Find me if you can." Screaming in fear, the girls ran down the stairs as fast as they could. They walked to the front door and went back to the neighbor's house. The two were shaking with fear, and told the neighbor that once again they found something written on the wall. The girls who had just lost their mother and spent so much time at home without their father, the neighbor said they could come and call their father. On the phone, Annie and Jessica told Brian what had happened. The man told them to come back. Later, when Brian arrived, he went straight to Annie's room and saw the inscription on the wall. But there was another message on the wall, which the girls hadn't mentioned on the phone, that said, "Marry me." It was at this moment that Brian noticed that something really strange was happening. As of this moment, there are several versions of what would have happened next. One of them is that when Brian was leaving the room, he saw a short and scrawny man standing in the hallway. This kid was covered in makeup and wore a blonde wig, as well as a wedding dress that belonged to Brian's late wife. He also had a hatchet in one of his hands. Fearing for his life and the safety of his daughters, Brian fought the intruder, but the boy somehow managed to knock him out and took the opportunity to escape. That boy, as you may already know, was Daniel. Another version tells that Daniel was hiding in the wardrobe, wearing makeup and with a hatchet in his hand, but not wearing his wedding dress. When Brian turned and caught him through the crack in the door, the two got into a fight and Daniel managed to escape, disappearing through the house. Some sources claim that the girls were at home when it all happened. Daniel would have chased the sisters, but they locked themselves in a room. After Daniel fled, Brian called the police, and when they arrived, they carried out a thorough search to the house. Behind a dresser in his room, the police found a small door. When they opened it, they discovered a small unfinished area of a few meters, a kind of lining. Between the bedroom floor and the other floor and inside was Daniel LaPlante. Annie was stunned. It was that strange boy she dated about 2 months ago. The exact time Daniel was hidden in the Andrews family home is not certain. Some sources claim it was around 15 days. Other articles say he spent almost 2 months there, hidden, without anyone noticing his presence, posing as the ghost from Annie's mother. Officers found a variety of items in the ceiling. The place was covered in rubbish, as well as a sleeping bag, beer cans and food wrappers, and a few pieces of clothing that belonged to the family. The ceiling was connected to a passageway, through which Daniel would have been able to crawl and crash into walls in different parts of the house. Another very scary part of this story is that there were holes in the walls, made by Daniel, which he used to spy on the family. Daniel LaPlante was then arrested and imprisoned. As he was 16 years old at the time, he was placed in rehabilitation center for young offenders, where he spent 10 months from January to October 1987. Upon turning 17, Daniel's case was transferred to the common court, and as it was now being persecuted as an adult, he could post bail. That bail was paid by the young man's mother, who was released soon after she could live his life in peace, but he had other plans. His stay in the detention center had messed up his already messed up mind once and for all. In November, he broke into a neighbor's house. This time, Daniel didn't come into play. He went to steal, taking 2 pistols from their residence. On the afternoon of December 1st, 1987, Daniel LaPlante, armed with one of the stolen pistols, walked half a mile from his home to the Gustafson family home. The family consisted of 33-year-old Priscilla, her 34-year-old husband Andrew, and their 2 children, 7-year-old Abigail and 5-year-old William. Priscilla was pregnant for the couple's 3rd child. She was a daycare teacher, extremely religious, and everyone considered her a sweet and caring woman. Daniel entered the house, which had recently been decorated for Christmas. Inside, he found Priscilla and William. Abigail was about to get home from school and Andrew was working. It is not entirely clear how the horrific events unfolded, but according to forensics, Daniel took Priscilla to her room, where he beat and abused her. He placed a pillow over the woman's head to muffle the sound and shot her twice. He then took little William and drowned him in the bathtub upstairs. When Abigail got home from school and entered the house, he too drowned her in a bathtub downstairs. Around 5 p.m., Andrew returned home from work and found it strange that the house was very quiet. The man was used to being warmly welcomed by his children and wife, and when that didn't happen, he felt something was wrong. Andrew then went upstairs, and as he entered the room, he was struck by the horrible sight of his lifeless wife. There was blood everywhere. Priscilla was lying on her stomach, on the bed with a pillow on her head. The man started looking for his children around the house and also found them lifeless. In panic, he ran to the neighbor's house and called the police. When the police arrived, they located the bodies of William and Abigail in separate rooms. In the master bedroom, they found 2 .22 caliber shells, an open undamaged beer can, and semi-stands on the bed. They also discovered footprints in a floor bed outside the house. The small town of Townsend was mourning the deaths of members of the Gustafson family. No one could imagine who would do something so terrible. Detectives made a list of possible suspects. And unsurprisingly, given his previous crimes and the fact that he had just been released from juvenile detention, Daniel LaPlante was on the top of the list. The next day, December 2nd, the police went after Daniel to interrogate him and found him at a Townsend Public Library. He denied any involvement in the crime, telling police he was at home watching TV most of the day, and then attended his 6-year-old niece's birthday party. In addition to his suspicions, the police had no concrete evidence linking him to the crime and released him. Later the same day, the police went to LaPlante's home to interrogate him once more. As they approached Daniel, who was on the porch, he turned and ran off in the woods. It was obvious he had something to hide. And when the police searched his house, they found a lot of incriminating evidence. A search of the woods separating Gustafson and LaPlante's home was revealed a shirt belonging to Daniel, and a pair of white gloves, which detectives believe he was wearing when he drowned Abigail and William. An alert was issued by the police, and the hunt for Daniel had begun. Quickly, numerous police officers from neighboring cities arrived to assist in a search, and even a state police helicopter was sent. In addition to sniffer dogs, and about 50 volunteers joined forces to find the criminal. As he fled, Daniel wasn't careful, nor did he hide his steps. He even kidnapped a woman along the way, forcing her to take him in her van through town. Because of Daniel's carelessness, the woman managed to escape and called the police to report what had happened, saying that Daniel was in her van. In the meantime, several reports and sightings of Daniel were sent to the police, and thanks to the help of the population, they found Daniel around 6:30 p.m. on December 3rd. He was hiding in a dump near the lumberyard in the town of Ayer, about 17 kilometers from Townsend. Daniel didn't resist arrest. The police said he was laughing hysterically. As they searched him, the police discovered a gun hidden in his private parts. He was charged with the deaths of Priscilla, Abigail, and William Gustafson, and received a number of other charges related to crimes he committed while on the run from the police. The evidence found at Daniel's house that linked him to the crime was indisputable. The officers found in his room a .22 caliber shell, which matched the two found at the crime scene, a pair of Converse sneakers, whose sole matched the footprints near the house, a sock of saliva, which police believed was used to get Priscilla, and a lock of hair belonging to Abigail. Officers also found the wireless phone stolen from the Gustafsons' home, and a fingerprint, which belonged to Daniel, was identified on the family's phone. While DNA technology was still in its infancy at this time, laboratory analysis of Daniel's blood revealed that the semen found in Priscilla's bed belonged to him. At the trial, an officer testified that his sniffer dog called the scent of an object at Gustafson's home, and followed the scent to Daniel's house. There was no longer any doubt that he was put on trial. Daniel had pleaded not guilty to all 3 accounts of murder. His trial began in October 1988, when he was 18 years old. He underwent a psychiatric evaluation, in which he was found fit to be judged as a normal person. Although Daniel was a minor at the time of the crimes, the judge had already ruled that he would be tried as an adult. In court, the prosecution called 50 witnesses, many of whom were members of Daniel's own family. During the trial, he showed no remorse and was extremely derisive, constantly laughing at the judge. In an attempt to move the jury, the defense attorney justified that his client had a bad childhood, in which he was abused in all kinds of ways by different people, including his father, stepfather, and therapist. This defense strategy didn't work, and Daniel was found guilty on all accounts after about 5 hours of jury deliberation. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. Upon receiving this sentence, Daniel didn't show any reaction. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying the whole situation. He was incarcerated at Norfolk Prison in Massachusetts. In 1993, he pleaded his conviction, claiming that search and seizure warrants on his home shouldn't have been granted, but his appeal was denied. Daniel was just a troubled teenager on the loose, as well as a difficult inmate to deal with in prison. In 2000, he requested his transfer as he was being threatened with death by other detainees. His request was not granted, and he had to be isolated from other inmates. Because of this, he was banned from having access to the prison library, as there was a high chance that other inmates would catch him there. Even though it was a matter of his own safety, Daniel didn't accept and decided to sue the Norfolk Prison Directorate, claiming that they were preventing him from gaining access to knowledge. And the most absurd thing is that he won this lawsuit and received a compensation of $450. In addition to these things, Daniel was constantly punished for trafficking adult content in jail, which is illegal. In 2013, Daniel claimed that he was not authorized to properly exercise his faith, and he tried again to sue the Norfolk Prison Director, but this time he didn't win. In 2017, aged 46, he appealed for a reduced sentence after the Supreme Court ruled that people who committed crimes when they were minors could not be sentenced to life in prison without parole. He had been in prison for 30 years and hoped his sentence could be changed. If that had happened, he would have become eligible for parole in 2017. But since that didn't happen, he won't become eligible until 2032. After a breath of humanity, Daniel apologized to Gustafson family during the hearing, saying, "I have no words to fully express my deep sadness, but I'm really sorry for the harm I've caused. Words cannot capture what I did. I took 3 innocent lives. Because of me, a 5-year-old boy will never turn 6, and a 7-year-old girl will never turn 8. Because of me, A woman will never be able to give birth to her third child. I stole the first breath of an unborn child. A husband will never be able to hear from his family again. I love you. I deeply regret it. Please forgive me. From the very essence of who I am, from the bottom of my soul, I am sorry. However, this apology felt superficial and false. For many, he was just doing what he thought he needed to do, or was being guided by his lawyers. While apologizing, he didn't show any reaction and seemed to almost flaw off as his bulk. In 2019, he requested a new hearing to obtain parole, but his request was denied. Andrew Gustafson remarried in 1989 to a woman named Carol, who was also a widow. They wore 2 rings each to remember the deceased spouses. The couple had 2 daughters, Holly and Laura. Andrew left his law firm and began working in the state as a child advocate, where he served for 12 years. In May 2014, Andrew Gustafson died of cancer at age 60. On his deathbed, he reportedly said, "Never let him out. He must rot in prison." We often said the truth is stranger than fiction, and Daniel LaPlante's story looks like it's straight out of a horror movie. In fact, the Daniel LaPlante case has evolved over the years into urban legend status. Some reports claim the incidents that took place between 1986 and 1987 were deliberately exaggerated by the media. But similarly, all the reports claim that everything happened as it was told to you today. He is responsible for the trauma caused to several victims in a series of bizarre acts that even seem like a lie, but unfortunately are not. Well, folks, that's it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Best wishes, and I'll see you next time.